It started with a knock on my door, loud, sharp, and impatient. I was already on edge because my home ICU equipment had been acting up all morning. I opened the door to find her, the HOA president, the one we all call Karen, behind her back. Arms crossed, clipboard in hand, with that same disapproving scowl she wore like a badge of honor. She said my medical equipment was drawing too much power and claimed it was against HOA policy. I tried to explain, calmly, that this wasn't just about electricity. This was life-saving equipment, but she didn't care. She'd made up her mind. Minutes later, the power to my home was cut. No warning, no notice. My machines started beeping like crazy, alarms going off as the battery backup kicked in. I could feel the panic rising, my heart pounding louder than the machines themselves. I made a few desperate calls. Time was running out. I had less than 30 minutes before the backup battery would fail, and she knew it. But I wasn't going to let her win. 5 minutes later, the street shook as a 40-ton generated truck rolled into the neighborhood. It was massive, loud, and completely out of place on our quiet cul-de-sac. And yes, it was mine. I pulled every favor I had, called in help from a buddy who runs emergency power services. The look on Karen's face when that truck backed into my driveway, priceless. But it wasn't about payback, it was about survival. About standing up for what's right when someone in power decides to play games with something as serious as your health. What happened next took this whole thing from outrageous to unbelievable. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, or better, everything changed again. Let's just say, when you park a generated truck in front of a power-hungry HOA president's rose bushes, you'd better be ready for the fallout. The generated truck was still rumbling when I noticed neighbors peeking through their blinds, some stepping out to see what all the noise was about. It's not every day a giant industrial truck pulls into a residential neighborhood, especially not one with fresh-cut lawns and HOA rules about lawn gnomes. Karen stormed down the sidewalk, heels clacking like gunshots on the pavement, waving her arms as if that alone could stop 40 tons of machinery. Her voice was sharp and shrill, demanding that the driver turn around immediately. But he just looked at me, waiting for the signal. I nodded, he stayed. Let me rewind a little. I live with a chronic illness that requires me to use at-home ICU-grade equipment, oxygen concentrators, monitoring gear, and a specialized ventilator. It's not optional. The system runs 24/7, powered directly through my home's electrical grid. The HOA was fully aware of this. I filed the paperwork, submitted the medical documentation, everything. But ever since Karen took over as president last year, she's been looking for reasons to make life harder for certain residents, especially those who don't fit the image she wants the neighborhood to have. At first, it was passive stuff, letters in my mailbox about weeds that didn't exist, warnings about non-compliant trash bins, even complaints about the sound of my air purifier. Then last week, I got a vague notice about unauthorized energy use, and I knew she was circling. But I never thought she'd actually cut the power. Not like that, not knowing the risks. By now, the truck was fully parked, and my friend, who's dealt with emergency medical installs before, was already rolling out cables. Karen kept yelling, but the driver ignored her. Then, out of nowhere, she pulled out her phone. I thought she was calling security or maybe even the police. But what she said next made my stomach drop. This wasn't just about power or noise anymore. Karen was about to take things to a whole new level, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go. Karen was pacing in circles now, still on the phone, her voice rising with every step. I couldn't hear exactly who she was talking to, but she kept repeating words like code violation, unauthorized vehicle, and public safety. She glanced back at the generated truck like it was some kind of monster parked on her perfectly manicured street. The driver kept working, running thick power cables toward my garage, staying cool even with Karen glaring holes through him. My buddy nodded at me. We were close to getting everything hooked up. Inside, my equipment was hanging on, but barely. Alarms chirped now and then, battery indicators dropping fast. The stress was getting to me. I could feel it, tight chest, dizziness creeping in, but I had to stay focused. I couldn't let her win, not when she knew exactly what this equipment was for. Around that time, my neighbor, Mr. Clark, came over. He's an older guy, keeps to himself mostly, but today he looked fired up. He told me he'd overheard Karen talking with another board member earlier in the week about cleaning up the neighborhood. Apparently, she didn't just mean landscaping. She had a list, actual names of people she considered problems. I was on it. So were a few others. A veteran down the street, a single mom who runs a daycare from home, and even a couple who'd been working night shifts and parked their car in the wrong direction once. She'd been slowly turning the HOA into her own personal kingdom, using the rules like weapons. And now, with this stunt, she was pushing boundaries no one thought she'd cross. The rumor was she called in a city inspector, claiming the generated truck was a fire hazard. But that made no sense. It was a certified emergency unit, with all the right permits. Still, if she could spin it the right way, she might shut it down. And if she did that, my equipment would fail. That wasn't just an inconvenience, it was dangerous. As the sun started to set and more neighbors gathered, whispering among themselves, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore. Karen had drawn a line, and the whole neighborhood was now watching to see who would cross it first. By the time the sky turned orange and the streetlights flickered on, it felt like the entire neighborhood had come alive. People who'd barely waved at each other were now standing in clusters, phones out, recording everything. Karen was still on her power trip, circling the generated truck like she could intimidate it into leaving. But her voice had started to change. It wasn't just angry anymore, it was desperate. She knew she was losing control of the situation and, worse, losing the crowd. My friend finally gave me the signal. The generator was online. He flipped a switch, and I could hear the hum shift as power started flowing through the cables. Inside my house, the ICU gear blinked back to full power. The alarms went silent, replaced with a steady, comforting rhythm. I felt like I could finally breathe. But outside, the storm was just getting started. That's when the city inspector showed up. A white van rolled in slowly, hazard lights flashing. Out stepped a man with a clipboard and a very tired look on his face. Karen rushed over, practically dragging him toward the truck, pointing and ranting about code violations, diesel fumes, and unauthorized industrial machinery. The inspector listened politely, nodding, jotting things down. Then he walked over to me. I handed him the medical paperwork, emergency exemption forms, and generator permits. He read every line carefully. The crowd leaned in, quiet. Even Karen fell silent, watching him like her whole scheme depended on what he said next. He didn't say much, just asked a few questions, looked over the generator setup, took a few photos. Then he walked back toward his van, no expression on his face, no hint of what he was thinking. Karen followed, still muttering under her breath. And just when I thought things might finally calm down, 2 more cars pulled up, this time with city code enforcement logos on the doors. More officials, more tension. The neighbors started murmuring. Phones came back up. Even my friend looked nervous now. Then Karen did something I never saw coming. She pointed at my house, turned to the inspectors, and said 7 words that made the air feel like it dropped 10 degrees. He's endangering the entire neighborhood's safety. For a second, everything stopped. You could hear the hum of the generator, the distant barking of a dog a few houses down, but no one spoke, not even the inspectors. Karen had crossed a new line. Accusing me of endangering the neighborhood wasn't just dramatic, it was dangerous. It meant she was trying to turn the entire situation against me, framing it like I was the problem, not her. Not the one who had shut off life-saving power. Not the one who had escalated a medical emergency into a full-blown HOA circus. One of the code enforcement officers stepped forward, notebook in hand. He looked uncomfortable, like he knew things were getting out of control, but couldn't just walk away. He asked me to step aside so he could inspect the connection from the generator to my house. I agreed, even helped him check the cable path, showed him the permits again. Meanwhile, Karen was still going, insisting that diesel fumes were spreading toxic air, that the noise level was unbearable, and that I was violating a dozen HOA noise and safety codes. But then the second twist hit, and it didn't come from me. Mrs. Patel, a quiet neighbor from 2 doors down, stepped out with her teenage son. She said loud enough for everyone to hear, "My son uses a CPAP machine every night. If you're cutting off his power next, we need to know now." Heads turned. Then Mr. Clark chimed in, saying his wife was recovering from surgery and needed an electric bed and compression machine. Another neighbor stepped up too. He had a diabetic child and used a home insulin fridge. Suddenly, Karen wasn't just targeting me anymore. She'd unknowingly turned herself into the villain of the entire block. Her crusade for neighborhood order was starting to look more like a personal vendetta with real consequences. But instead of backing off, Karen doubled down. She accused us all of exaggerating, claimed we were faking medical conditions to skirt the rules. That's when the city inspector walked back from his van with a phone in his hand. He had been on a call, apparently with someone higher up. He walked straight toward me, looked past Karen, and said something that made my stomach tighten. "There's been a formal complaint filed, but not just against you." The inspector's words hit like a thunderclap. Everyone froze. Even Karen stopped mid-sentence, her mouth still half open. "Not just against you," he repeated, now turning to face her directly. "There's been a formal complaint filed against the HOA board, citing negligence and unsafe actions that may have endangered multiple residents." Karen's face went pale. Apparently someone, maybe even a neighbor, had already contacted the city about her shutting off power to a home with medical needs. And it wasn't just about me anymore. The inspector revealed that the complaint included multiple households, all listing similar incidents: threats, fines for non-existent violations, ignored safety concerns. The city had quietly started looking into it after receiving several anonymous tips. Tonight just happened to be the tipping point. The second officer stepped forward and confirmed that they were now required to submit a formal report. If the HOA board was found to have acted irresponsibly, especially in a way that could have endangered lives, they could face legal consequences. Karen tried to interrupt, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that she was just following the rules. But no one was buying it anymore. Then came the final twist. My friend, who had been quiet this whole time, pulled out his phone and tapped a few buttons. A soft ding came from the generator's control panel. He looked up and said calmly, "By the way, this unit's electric. Runs off a lithium battery core. No diesel, no fumes, just backup silence." He gave a small smile. "Karen, you made all this noise over a generator quieter than your air conditioner." The crowd laughed, nervously at first, then louder. A few people even clapped. Karen looked like she wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. By then, it was clear. The power was stable. My medical equipment was safe. The city was involved. And Karen's grip on the neighborhood, crumbling fast. She stormed off without another word, her clipboard clutched tightly like it could still give her control. But the damage was done. And as the last bit of sunlight faded, I looked around at the neighbors, some of them smiling now, standing a little closer, and knew this wasn't just the end of a bad day. It was the start of something better. The next morning, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, but in a good way. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. Karen hadn't been seen since last night, and word spread fast that a special HOA meeting had been called. Apparently, the board was under review, and several members were reconsidering their roles after realizing how far things had gone. The complaint filed with the city had opened a formal investigation, and they were already reviewing HOA actions from the past year, especially ones tied to medical accommodations and emergency power access. As for me, the generator stayed for a few more days just to be safe. My health equipment was running smoothly again, and a few neighbors even offered to help set up a better backup plan moving forward. Mrs. Patel brought over tea and cookies. Mr. Clark helped clear a few branches near my power lines. People I barely knew started checking in, not out of pity, but because they finally saw what was happening. This neighborhood, once ruled by strict rules and fear of fines, started feeling like an actual community again. The biggest surprise: a handwritten note left at my door later that week. It was from Karen. No return address, no signature, just 6 words. Maybe I went too far. Sorry. I didn't need more than that. Some things don't need to be fixed completely, they just need to be acknowledged. And sometimes, standing up to a bad rule or a broken system doesn't just protect you, it gives others the courage to do the same. If this story shows anything, it's that being quiet to keep the peace isn't always the right move. Sometimes you've got to roll in with a 40-ton generator and show people what real power looks like.